Welcome everyone to our webinar on SIL Success Blueprint, Mastering the Legal and Financial Landscape. My name is Astrid Rivalland and my co-hosts are Nicole. Nicole, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Hi, thanks Astrid, and thank you to LegalVision for inviting us to join this webinar. As Astrid said, my name is Nicole Gamerov and I'm the founder and CEO of MyCareSpace. MyCareSpace is a healthcare platform that connects NDIS participants with providers, and they also get connected with information. So that's one of the most critical things that we find people need. We have up to 3,000 people on our website today, all looking for services and supports. And we've been around for 8 years, and we're really happy to be here today. Thanks, Astrid. Over to you, Matthew.
And I'm Matthew Cagney, the CEO of ShiftCare. We are a care management, time and attendance, rostering, scheduling platform with time and attendance and payroll information at the core, flowing into NDIS claiming. So essentially we help with scheduling the complexities of running a SIL house where you've got multiple participants, multiple different care ratios, multiple different staff. How do you optimize that? How do you make sure the right staff is at the right shift and the right time? And ultimately, how do you help pay those staff the correct amount of money in relation to the awards and so forth? And then ultimately, we want to get paid. So we also help you get paid and we help make sure that you're claiming for the right product and service in the right time, and we help you submit that to the NDIA. Astrid, you're just on mute there.
Sorry. Before you begin, you'll receive the recording and slides in your email. You can ask us questions in the Q&A box at the end of the webinar. Some of you have already submitted questions and we'll try and get through most of it. If we can't, we can always get back to you afterwards. We also ask that you please complete the feedback survey after the webinar. I see that there's a poll going, but we'll just launch straight into it. You can also claim your complimentary consultation with LegalVision, where we can discuss how we can help you with your business. You can leave your contact details in the survey that appears when the webinar ends, and you can also contact us via our website. At the end of the webinar, we'll also have Matthew and Nicole's contact details on the slide, and this will be circulated, so you can also get in touch with them. This is the agenda for today. We'll be going through the legal foundations of a SIL house. We will then be speaking about how to maximize your revenue, how to effectively roster your staff to deliver the services safely, and also we'll go through the key takeaways and then we'll go through the Q&A. So we might launch straight into it. The first thing to talk about is the legal foundations that every SIL provider should have in place. When you start a SIL business, you would most likely need to be registered. And from July 1st, that will become compulsory that you are a registered provider. This means that you have to be prepared for an audit. That you pass an audit does not necessarily mean that you are legally compliant for privacy or the Australian consumer law. So you have to ensure that all the documents that you have, all your policies, your procedures, your client service agreements, comply with the NDIS regulations, but also consumer law, work health and safety, employment law. And so there's a range of laws that you need to be aware of. You have to start at the beginning and look at your corporate structure. How are you setting up? Are you a PTY Ltd? Do you have a holding company? Would it be best to have your different arms of your business under different subsidiaries, which would then make selling part of the business off easier? There are also considerations that I think Nicole would like to touch on about when you are purchasing a business. Because some providers enter the market by purchasing a business that's already been either registered or about to be registered. Nicole, did you want to discuss some of the considerations?
Thanks, Astrid. And we have hundreds of SIL providers contacting us every week, every month, and many of them are new to SIL. Many of them have just bought a SIL business. And what we found is that people don't always think about the implications of going into SIL and potentially buying an existing SIL business. So if you're buying a company that is a SIL business, you need to think about what are you actually taking on. So yes, you might be taking on the customers, but you might also be taking on the liabilities. And we think it's really important to understand, if you're taking on the entire company with the liabilities, what insurances do you have in place, and is there continuity of cover? You don't want to be in a situation where you're taking on liabilities and your existing insurer has not given you cover for past liabilities. So just something to think about if you're new to SIL or you're thinking of buying a company.
Thanks, Nicole. So yes, having your due diligence before purchasing is a really important point. Which then leads me to the next issues, which is privacy and cybersecurity. Those are two of the very big issues that can arise in a SIL house. To be able to comply with both the NDIS regulations, privacy laws, and in some states, your health laws as well, in terms of health records, you have to make sure that you have the right policies and procedures. This is not as easy as just having a privacy policy on your website and a cybersecurity policy. You need to ensure that all your support workers, all your staff members, understand their obligations under the privacy and cybersecurity. Are they using their phones to take pictures of wounds on participants if they have pressure wounds? Are they taking phone calls in the middle of a train or a busy place where they may be mentioning participant names? Is it also an issue that when you are doing information sharing, for example, if you're speaking to the plan manager or the support coordinator, do you have the right informed consents in place? Can you, when you're doing a handover to a different provider, or are you able to share the current information? So having all your consents in place are crucial. We also have to look at your privacy policies from an employment perspective. Do you have your phone use policy? Do you have information that guides your staff? Are you able to provide training to your staff about how to share information? And SIL houses can be even more complicated because you may have third-party providers that access the SIL house that are doing community access and may help the participants in and out of the house and access personal information of other people living there. Nicole and Matthew will be able to give you some tips on how to make sure that you have the right insurance and how you can put things in place to minimize your risk of breaching privacy and cybersecurity laws. Nicole, have anything to add?
Yeah. So Astrid, thank you. I think it is one of those risks, so cyber risk and privacy laws that I think people are a lot more aware of these days than maybe 4 years ago. One of the biggest things we see is that if people are looking for the lowest cost policy, they might not end up with the cover when they have a breach, a privacy breach, or a cybersecurity event. So our advice at this stage is understand the flow of data, understand who has access to personal identifiable information, do your risk assessment of your cyber points, of sort of sensitive points, and then make sure that the policy that you're buying is adequate and appropriate for your business. So don't go for the cheapest policy. That's really important. And then the other important thing, I think, and one of the biggest mistakes that businesses, NDIS businesses, but businesses in general, is if you've had an incident, do not try and manage it yourself. So one of the benefits of buying a cyber insurance cover is that, generally speaking, the insurers should be giving you information about what to do in the event of a breach, a data breach. And the most important thing is to respond quickly, to notify your insurer, and they can help you mitigate the risk. So if you wait a week before you notify your insurer, the size of the loss could be much bigger than had you notified them within a couple of hours of the breach happening. So my advice would be get a broker involved, understand what your exposure is, make sure that you have the right policy for your business, for the size of your business. And then the other thing is, do not wait to notify your insurer, because some policies do actually have a window within which you have cover. But if you notify them after, say, 6 months, you no longer have cover for that event. So just a couple of high-level tips around cyber insurance that the audience should think about. MyCareSpace does offer SIL providers access to affordable insurance, and we have an insurance partner, Gallagher's, that we can help you work with to make sure that you have the right policy.
Thanks, Nicole. And another very important point is where your data is being stored. What software are you using? Is your data being stored somewhere overseas and you don't have any access to it? And I think Matthew has some quite useful information to share about software essentials.
Yeah, I think, Nicole and Astrid, great topic. And this is one that's really close to my heart. I think it just comes down to me, the practical elements. One, there's obviously a legal responsibility for you to look after that information about your participants and your staff and to keep that secure. There's a reputational one that hurts you more than anything. And so I believe Nicole was the one who spoke about understand your data flows. And that's really important. About Astrid touched on, if I'm taking a photo of a participant and maybe it's a wound dressing or something along those kind of lines, where is that picture initially stored? And I think we need to understand that. So partnering with the right software vendor, because all software vendors should have a great cybersecurity policy. And that means that organizations like ShiftCare have designed our information flows and security of that information, that once it's stored in ShiftCare, it's safe and secure, and we essentially warrant that, and we have an insurance or we have an at-risk liability to actually protect you if something goes wrong. So that's on us to cater for a lot of the details. But just to give you an example, when somebody takes a photo of a wound dressing within our ShiftCare mobile app, we don't want that picture stored on essentially the staff's mobile phone. That's stored in the ShiftCare app, and that's immediately transferred to a secure cloud environment, which is all hosted here in Australia and doesn't go overseas. So just basic things like that. And where do the documents go? I talk to hundreds of providers a week, and they say, "Oh, Matt, how do we stop our staff sharing images and commentary about my participants on WhatsApp or Facebook? I've really got to stop that. I've got to cut that down." So you need a secure messaging platform that's actually baked into your care management platform. It's one of the really easy ways to tighten up that information flow. And then there's other risks, even just the basic physical risks. A lot of SIL providers have a lot of care plans and confidential patient client notes actually at the front door of their SIL house, where anybody can get access to it. So I think it's on us to continue to improve that, and that should be stored digitally in a secure manner, that only people with the right access privileges can access that information within a particular time period. And they're all the things that we have to think about as a software developer that supports over 5,500 providers.
And Matthew, I'll just jump in there, because I think, all the points you raise are really important. One of the things at MyCareSpace that we need to raise with participants is that we need to share their personal information with providers. So if you come to MyCareSpace looking for a therapist, and our service to you is that we'll connect you with an occupational therapist or speech therapist, we need to share your personal information. And so for us, it's really important that people understand what information is being shared and that we get that permission. And I'd imagine in SIL environments, it's really important that sometimes that information has to be shared in order to deliver high quality care. But then you need the permissions, and you need the participants to understand who's that information being shared, in what situation, and do you have their permissions. And the staff need to understand, because it's one thing management and the executives understanding the privacy law, but if your staff don't understand the importance, and if they don't understand the value, then there's no point, right? And the other important thing is, when you're buying cybersecurity insurance, yes, it's a tick the box exercise, but if you tick a box and say yes to a question when in fact the answer is no, you most likely will not be covered in the event of a claim. So it's really important that the person who's actually on the ground implementing policies and procedures understands the implications, but that management also understand what's happening on the ground. So it's a two-way flow of information.
Exactly.
Yeah, really good points. And the other consideration that flows from this is your data retention policies. Do you know what data you need to hold on for 7 years? Do you know which one you have to delete immediately because it's too high risk? Are you using AI and a lot of providers are now using AI. Where is that AI sending your information? Are they training the bot with it? Is the client information being put in the air, and therefore you're immediately breaching privacy laws if you don't have the required consents from participants? So many things to think about for cybersecurity and privacy. We might move on now to the next big issue, which is your service agreement. And I'm assuming that most people here are running SIL houses where you're providing both the accommodation and the services. Generally speaking, under SIL, the NDIS will only be concerned with the SIL services per se, and you have a SIL service agreement. Then you have to also think about your residential laws, which will be at the state level. So a SIL house in Queensland, for example, will not be under the same regulations of a SIL house in Victoria. So if you're in more than one state, knowing the tenancy laws and the residential laws in the state that you're operating is very important. But going back to your SIL service agreement, the NDIA has a price guide, which you would all be aware of. And some of the item 9s in the price guide can only be claimed if it is covered in a service agreement or agreed to in writing. These are things like transport, cancellation policies, whether you're doing weekly claiming or hourly claiming, how are you handling vacancies. Having a very tight service agreement is crucial for you to be able to manage non-payment of invoices. Because we have seen the NDIA ask a lot of the time that you need to provide your shift notes and a copy of your service agreement if they have rejected an invoice or if they're disputing an invoice. So making sure that you have all the information ready to go and that you've put things in place from the start, whether it's using the right app or the right software, that you have the right, you can provide all this information to the NDIA, can minimize cash flow issues. I'm just going to put over to Nicole and Matthew now if you have anything to add about service agreements.
I would just say from a MyCareSpace perspective, we often see that SIL providers are very fixated on, well, what are the regulations? What does the NDA require? And we often say, well, what is simply good business practice? And I think a lot of what you're sharing, Astrid, is just basic good business practice. And we always try and bring providers back to, don't just think along the lines of what's the minimum requirement under the NDIS Commission, but what's going to put you and your client in a good position in the event that there's a misunderstanding. So we just keep encouraging SIL providers to make sure that they have service agreements in place in the first instance, because I think a lot of people are just catching up. So that is a basic that we all assume, but in fact, it's not happening in practice. And we see that in the plan management side, that a lot of plan managers are not paying SIL invoices if you don't have a service agreement in place. So one to watch.
The other aspect to me is the service agreement just goes hand in hand with the care plan and roster of care. And anybody who's had the privilege of creating the roster of care and care plan knows they are hard. They're complex. And that's just for one person. And a lot of the time we know that a SIL house is just not one participant in that house. So the service agreement is great, but it's the roster of care and the care plan that sits within that and around that that's really important. And how does that interrelate with the other participants in that particular house? And ultimately, what are their staff ratios? How many staff do you need for that participant in a particular times? And how does that match your other participants that may be potentially in that house? They're really the key building blocks for me, outside of how do I get paid and how do I make sure I continue to get paid? Then I've got to run a profitable business, and I think they all intersect there. And they're hard. The NDIA doesn't make them easy, and the property is going to get harder. And that's all. It's got to be integrated back into, I think, as Astrid mentioned, into your price books. Your price books have got to be regularly updated, compliant, and actually tied back to that particular care plan and roster of care.
Yeah, and we see this now with the monthly funding periods for home and living as well. So being able to invoice within that month period and having all the right information will be crucial going forward. Both Nicole and Matthew have touched on what happens if the care needs change of a participant, and you're doing a 1-to-3 ratio, as most SIL houses, and suddenly one of the participants in the house needs a 1-to-1 or even 2-to-1 if they need to hoist. And you're stuck in that 1 month funding period where you can't access the funds from the following month while you do a change of circumstance. So trying to navigate changing needs is going to be really, really hard. You will also need to consider whether you have a duty of care to some high-risk, high-need participants where the invoices are not being paid, or there's a change of circumstance, or who knows what's going to happen on the month to month. But you can't ask them to leave the house because they will be at risk, but you're not actually getting paid, so you're operating at loss. We recommend that you usually have an exit plan in place for a participant, that the discussions start early with the participant and the formal or informal supports about what happens if the invoices are not paid, how long you'll be providing services if the invoices are not paid, and what are the other options available. For example, do they go back home with informal supports? Do they go to hospital? How do you manage the transition of those high-risk, high-needs participants? Matthew and Nicole, do you have anything to add on this?
Do you want to take that one first, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing here is that you need to understand what your skill set is, and if you're capable of taking on a combination of high risk and medium, and then you need to plan for these unexpected events to happen. And I think that's the important thing, Astrid, is that, you know, what we see is, and the data shows that on average SIL providers have roughly 2 months of working capital available. Now that doesn't provide you with sufficient buffer in the event that you start having vacancies. So if you have a high risk participant that ends up in hospital and is in hospital for an extended period of time, and that throws your ratios out and you can't invoice. These are things that SIL providers should in fact expect and they should plan for. So think about the implications that, you know, if your care ratios are changing and your cash flow is going to be affected, you need that buffer. Otherwise, you're putting yourself at risk and you're putting your participants at risk. The exit strategy is really important. I'll give Matthew a chance to jump in, but yeah, I'd love to chat more about vacancies and how we can manage them.
Yeah, and Nicole, you're a subject matter expert in this field. I just love hearing from you. I guess the other part is, if you look at 70 to 80% of my operating costs as a SIL provider are generally human capital. And so then it comes down to, how do I structure my human capital workforce so they don't have full-time employees potentially that are 100% of my payroll to cater for those kind of last-minute issues? Maybe I have and this is what we see across the industry, many providers have a cohort of maybe 40 to 50% that are actually casuals or contractors that I can ramp up or ramp down at the last minute. And so that's really important from a workforce human capital perspective. Then you need, sorry to bake in here, but you need a great rostering system that can talk to you about, like, what does my human capital look like? What are their skills, competencies, and certification? And to Astrid's point, do they have hoist training? And, you know, how many people do I have hoist training if I need this person that needs, 2-to-1 care? And do I have enough of a workforce to be able to cater for them? I need to be able to model that all in the background and forecast, what does my excess human capital look like? Or where am I going to go into a particular deficit because I'm bringing in this new client that has a much higher degree of support required?
A really good point, Matthew. And we're seeing more and more providers entering into relationships with each other to share the workforce, whether it's under contractor agreement or brokerage agreement. And we're seeing some providers rely more on labor hire businesses as well. I think we've discussed all we could right now on the key legal issues. Let's focus now on how to maximize revenue and talk about strategies that providers can use to streamline the payment processes and maximize revenue, and also avoid the situations where you can't pay your staff because cash flow is being impacted. Matthew and Nicole, leave this to you, it's far more in your area. Nicole, do you want to start?
Okay, cool. Yeah, very happy to. And you know, Astrid, one of the things that we see time and time again is SIL providers coming to MyCareSpace and saying, okay, I've just started a SIL business. I've invested money in setting myself up. I've paid all like all this money to set policies and procedures up, and now I need customers. And it's always a bit disconcerting because people need to understand that actually to run a good, profitable SIL business, the care side is very important, but actually understanding how long it takes to find customers, the matching process. So people need to allow for time to actually get to a profitable position. It doesn't just happen. The biggest risk that we see is over servicing as one of the issues why people aren't necessarily making a profit. And we know that recent data that was actually shared at a conference last week is that on average, the median SIL provider has a 0.1 loss, so 0.1% overall loss. So they're not making a profit. And one of the biggest reasons we see for this is that they're over-servicing customers. And it's easy to gloss over this. It's easy to say, well, we'll stop over-servicing customers, but we all know that if a customer's circumstances change suddenly and they need a higher level of care, the SIL provider is put in a very difficult situation. If you immediately start servicing at a higher level, don't assume that you will get paid for that. So what we recommend in that situation is that you immediately get in touch with the support coordinator or the person's advocate and put in, build a case for a change of circumstances so that you can very quickly put that into the NDA. Do not assume that because the person needs the additional support that you're going to get paid, and don't assume that someone else is going to take care of that. So I think that's the big issue. The other thing that we see, which is really important in terms of getting paid on time and running a profitable business, is be compliant. The biggest risk is either not getting paid or your payments being delayed by the plan manager or by the NDIA. It's a really simple thing, but time and time again, we see SIL providers not actually being able to produce invoices which have all the basics in them, all the basic information. So that invoice will be flagged either by the plan manager that's paying it or by the NDIA. So just make sure that you get that right. Touching on again, expect vacancy. So build that into your, build that into your profit margin or your business structure, and then have a plan around how you're gonna manage that. So, are you going to have exit strategies in place? Are you going to consolidate different SIL properties? But certainly having a plan is really important, because the waiting approach doesn't work. So maybe you want to jump in now, Matthew, and talk a bit about the software component.
Yeah, look, in great topic. The key part for us is you want to automate as much of this as you possibly can. So from the original, you're building out your costing plan about how much is it going to cost me to service this participant. You want a great software that helps you build that out and budget for that says, okay, to look after Nicole for the next 2 years, and this is her kind of support and care plan. These are the services I'm going to provide. This is how many hours I can bill, and this is what I'm going to essentially generate from that client, and therefore I can work out my profitability. So doing that right the first time is really important. Knowing what you're going in for, eyes wide open, not eyes shut, and just hoping for the best. Then understanding your resourcing, but then you need a great rostering scheduling application that essentially has the client's care and requirements and staff at hand. But that will ultimately, if your staff are clocking in and out of the platform and actually doing their tasks, notes, and filling care plans and incidents and forms in that, you've got all the supporting evidence that a software company like ShiftCare or any other one can help you automatically submit to PRODA. And the beauty about a nice automated submission process is you get the rejections really quickly. We might not want to get the rejections quickly, but I tell you what, it's better than waiting 2 weeks, 4 weeks later on, and then finding, oh God, okay, they've rejected that particular claim or that line item. And so you want to be able to go have a tool that allows you to quickly go back and say, what did I get wrong on that? Have I attached the wrong price book, the wrong service code, or I'm actually claiming something that I wasn't able to provide for that customer? You want as much real-time feedback as you possibly can, and you want the associated checks and balances to ideally make sure I'm not rostering the wrong personnel or the wrong service for Nicole accidentally. So I feel like that's really important. Then the other one is, so that's getting the cash in the door, but obviously you've got to pay it out. My human capital is 70 to 80%. So you've got to make sure you're rostering the right workforce on, and you're doing that as efficiently as possible. There's no point paying 38.5 hours for a full-time workforce if they're not rostered on 38.5 hours. And I want to make sure I'm using that, but also given the complexities of running a 24/7 SIL house, you've got the SHADS award, and I don't want to mention that dirty word SHADS, but it's a nightmare to figure out what is this shift going to cost me. It's really hard. So you want a great software tool that allows you and alerts you real time to say, actually, if I roster Astrid on this particular shift, I've got to give her a break and I've got to pay her overtime. Maybe you might want to look at some other staff. So I think that's really important, because you get the money in, but equally as quick, it's going to go out to your staff. So you've got to make sure you've got the right staff on at the right time. And ideally, we see great SIL businesses matching SIL clients. So depending on their requirements and how many staff they need, if you can somehow overlap that and have the right staff coverage, they're the SIL organizations that seem to run a nice business. Obviously, you've got to look after the client, but if you get your staff ratios right across your clients, you will do well.
Matthew, I love what you said there about, the pricing and getting the pricing right. And again, we know that the margins are so thin, and we know that, small errors over time, week after week after week, can end up in large amounts of unfunded supports that you might never receive from the NDIA. So we do encourage providers to understand the price guide, understand what you can and can't charge. Make sure that you understand what's in the person's plan and what's funded, because at the end of the day, the plan managers are not going to pay for something that hasn't been included in a person's plan. And plan managers don't have the authority to approve funding that's not in the plan. So I think there's this sort of misconception that plan managers can do plan reviews, that plan managers can pay for things that participants might need but aren't in their plan. They can't. That all needs to be escalated. So just going back to the pricing, make sure you are that you're paying your support workers the right rate. I mean, LegalVision know that the wage theft is now a real thing, and the directors of companies are at risk if they're not paying the right rate. But at the same time, if you're paying slightly above the rate, your profits could be eroded very quickly. MyCareSpace has wonderful tools for NDIS providers to check what the rates are. It's regularly updated, and our most popular tool is actually our support worker rate tool. So that is one of the most popular resources on our website that gets thousands of hits every day. So make sure you know what rates you should be charging and paying your support workers.
Which is a really awesome topic, because I was talking to a couple of providers the other day, and a lot of SIL shifts are sleepover shifts as well. And depending on what region you're in and what your staff are, some organizations are paying a bounty for a sleepover shift. I can't remember what the payment rate is, but let's just say it's around, was it $50 or $70 potentially for a sleepover shift is the allowance you have to pay them. I can't remember the exact terminology, but other providers in our network, because it's so hard to find a staff to do them, they're paying them a bounty of $200 per sleepover shift to get them to do it. So you've also got to give consideration into staff availability, and how does that structure over the 7-day work week, which is essentially 24/7. What are your staff? What's their appetite to work the weekend 24/7 shift? And also, you hear a lot about what are the needs of the participant as well. And so you've really got to give a lot of consideration to that. Can you get the workforce to support them? How much is it going to cost you?
Also on that, staff safety, because if you have someone that's been rostered for a sleepover shift and they end up doing an active night of 4 or 5 hours, and they're rostered on at 8 a.m. in a different house or with a different participant, or even the same participant, you have staff safety issues. Are they too tired to work? What are your OHS obligations? LegalVision can advise on that and has done so many times. You may also be dabbling in in-home care or doing work in in-home care. And then you have staff which is potentially working across 2 sectors, aged care plus NDIS, and making sure that they're paid the right amount for the work that they're doing, or the different duties that they're doing is important. Or if you have a staff member that's a team leader, but is also doing support work in another house. So when they have different duties in different times, then LegalVision can help you work out how to pay them under the SHADS award. On the maximizing revenue, Matthew and Nicole, do you expect that the new funding periods will cause issues in terms of invoicing frequency or how the invoices have to be structured to match the funding period for each person's plan?
I mean, I think that it's too soon to say, Astrid. I think, they literally became operational on the 19th of May, and we actually put out a resource at MyCareSpace, and I think a lot of providers were potentially caught unaware, just seeing the volume of hits that it got. I think the important thing is for providers to understand what is the funding period, and if it's most likely going to be monthly within the person's plan, just make sure that their invoicing aligns with what's being allocated, because as we know, you can't over invoice, you won't be paid. There's a maximum amount that you can be paid per period. So they need to make sure that their invoices align, the value of the invoices align with the service that's actually being delivered and in that period. And we do know that the NDIS has brought this in to help people overspending. And so that is an important thing that providers need to understand. So Matthew, I'm not sure if ShiftCare is ready to go with the funding periods. I'd imagine so.
Yeah, look, yeah, we're ready to go for sure. And just to the point, it just comes down to make sure that, as we go back to the service agreement, the care plan, the roster of care, what they just want to make sure is, am I actually still able to claim for that particular service that I'm providing, and have I attached the right price book? So that's why it's really important to have all that stuff baked in at the core, so you're not going to make a mistake. So you've got your funding alerts and your budget alerts, and you've got clear documentation that I'm actually providing the service that I've been contracted to provide as well. I think that's really important with time and attendance. In America, they've got a concept called electronic visit verification. And every visit has to be electronically verified down to a geo profile to say, Nicole was actually with Astrid at this particular time. She did these tasks, and we have to submit that to the government. And it's really, the NDIA is they're just sort of trying to make sure that the participant is getting the service that the NDIA is funding, and they're just tightening this up. So good providers who are providing that service shouldn't have anything to hide from, but you just want to, you don't want to create additional labor or have your invoices rejected at the end of the month. So just make sure that, when you're setting up your initial roster of care, that you're attaching the right price book, the right service codes, and you've done your checks and balances, and ultimately that should flow out to the invoices in the end.
Thanks, Matthew. You've also touched upon rostering a few times. Do you have any tips about how a SIL provider can effectively roster staff, what they have to look for? I mean, you've mentioned that a couple of times during this talk, but if we can put it all together.
Yeah, I've probably hammered on that a lot. It's my favorite topic is scheduling, human capital management, and so forth. And it really just comes down to understanding what's the makeup of my participants in the SIL house. What are their care ratios? So we spoke about care ratios, and it can get complex if you've got a SIL house with 4 participants who have different care ratios throughout the day, and anybody who's done a roster of care will unfortunately know the nightmare that this is. And it's really up to us, or SIL operators. You've got to understand, what are my participants' requirements, not just one participant, but my 4 participants in that house. What do they look like as a group? Okay, now what do they look like as a group? And now how do I roster the appropriate staff on and manage those ratios throughout the day to make sure I've got the right coverage and I'm not under ratioed. So ideally you want a rostering system that's going to alert you, sorry, Astrid, you shouldn't create this shift or take this person off the shift because you don't have the right staff coverage between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m., for example.
Yeah. Nicole, do you have any tips for our listeners about how to effectively roster?
I think the most important thing is for people to understand that it should be a live a live process, that you're constantly looking to optimize your roster, and it's not a set and forget. Let's not forget, we are providing a human service, and there are humans at the end of the day that we are supporting, but that's also delivering the service. So to expect that your rostering is a set and forget I think is a big mistake. I see it as a living, breathing sort of instrument and framework that needs to be constantly optimized. And especially if you know that vacancies might happen, you have to constantly then go back to your rostering and optimize so that you don't be, you're not caught short. That's really important. I think the other key takeout for me is that take compliance seriously, because that can be one of the biggest downfalls in where providers come unstuck and have cash flow issues. So I think that's really important. And get good insurance. Make sure you have the right insurance. So, delivering SIL services is complex and it's high risk. So make sure that you have the right policy. Come and speak to us. We'd love to be able to help you with your insurance needs. Don't go for the lowest policy, because it might come back to bite you.
Oh, just one thing. Sorry, Matthew. I
was just going to say, when you talk about the roster, it changes all the time. And I think that's really important because they're an evolving thing. For some reason, my staff can't, one of my carers can't make the shift tomorrow, so I've got to change it. I've got to be aware of what are the client's needs, what are the certification, do they need hoist training, but what are their preferences as well? We know people in the SIL houses, they have complex requirements. Some are more complex than others. Some have social aspects, and you've got to have we've got to make sure we're pairing the right staff with those participants as well. And I think that's on us to help with that. And good rostering providers like ShiftCare help you bake a lot of that in to help reduce some of the noise when you're having to make that decision about, I've got to fill the shift. Who might be the best possible candidate for that shift? Do they have the right training, certification? Have they worked with that participant before? Have there been any negative reviews and so forth?
Really good points. One thing I'd like to add as well is your emergency and disaster management plans. These are really important. What will you do when things go wrong? And as Matthew says, if there's a shift where someone doesn't turn up, how are you filling that shift? Where's your workforce? Who do you have on call? And what happens if none of your existing staff members can actually fill that shift? Because you still have a duty of care to keep the participants safe. And it's up to you to ensure that you have put things in place so that you can get staff in the houses that are also matching the needs of the participants. We might move on now to summarize and get to our key takeaways, and we'll just start wrapping up. So basically what we want to make sure, and Matthew and Nicole, just feel free to add any key takeaways that you would like. My understanding is you want to ensure that you have your cash flow needs are met, that you put things in place legally and also in a compliance perspective, so that your invoices have less risk of being rejected or delayed, to ensure cash flow, to ensure human workforce is able to work, and that your participants are safe. That you also need to have a really good understanding of not just the NDIS regulations, but your privacy obligations, cybersecurity issues, data retention, and Australian consumer law. You need to keep really good records. You need to have service agreements. You have to have shift notes. And you need to use software that is compliant and is able to store this information in accordance to laws. You need to optimize the rostering, and that seems to be the biggest issue that anyone will be grappling with, is how to roster to keep the participants safe and also in an effective way from a cash flow perspective. You can use digital tools to build trust. Having a really great rostering software or invoicing software is really helpful, but be careful of AI. And get legal and financial advice early, including about your corporate structure. Matthew and Nicole, any other key takeaways you'd like to add?
I'll go if you want, Nicole.
Yeah.
I guess, just going back to the rostering, it's really, obviously we want to provide the right care to the particular participants, but managing a 24/7 roster is hard because, as Astrid mentioned and Nicole mentioned, you've got sleepovers, broken shifts, and overtime. And that can be really hard to manage, and it can be error prone. So you've got to get that right. And even if you do get it right, you could be leaking a lot of human capital in relation to overtime and those kind of payments. So you've got to really watch out for that. So you need a great tool that's going to help you roster the right person, give you real-time alerts as to, hey, actually, this shift is going to cost you a lot more if you have to quickly put this person on. And it can be time-consuming and error-prone if you get that wrong, especially if you've got your leave loading and all of those types of things wrong. It can be a very significant leaky bucket. So you just got to make sure you have the right partner in your corner to make sure you're not, one, leaking out this potentially good revenue out the back door from a human capital perspective, but also you're not exposing yourself to future risks down the line because I haven't paid my staff correctly.
Yeah, I think Matthew, just to jump in, absolutely, you need to know exactly what your margin of error is, and at what point are you heading into, I guess, a loss position, and how long can you sustain a loss, and that means like almost daily monitoring and optimizing, constantly optimizing, and then make sure you have the right protection in place. So, you know, we haven't touched on this, but think about the risk and exposure to sexual molestation and medical indemnity exposures. You know, we haven't even gone into that, but understand what is happening in that home. What are the needs of your participants, and making sure that you're covered for any scenario. Don't assume that if you're buying an off-the-shelf professional indemnity and public liability policy that you'll be covered. So avoid the set and forget type of mentality. This is a 24/7 service you're delivering, and I think as a manager and a business owner, it's 24/7 thinking about the risks and the outcomes.
Thanks, Matthew and Nicole. Now, I think that wraps up the main part of our webinar. You can download some of our resources that you may find useful. While we're waiting for the questions to come in, we'll just go through some housekeeping. We have a webinar coming up on AI, data, and automation, which you may find quite interesting, as a lot of providers are currently using AI for customer service. You can contact Nicole and Matthew here. Those are their contact details. And I'm just going to quickly talk to you about the membership. So when you become a LegalVision member, you have unlimited document drafting and review. You meet with our compliance team, which is usually me or someone in my team, and we go through the gaps in your business. We talk about your corporate structure, we talk about your employment needs and your commercial needs. You also get unlimited, sorry, something is happening with my computer. You get unlimited legal advice consultations, where you can just call and book a call via Prism, which is our client management software. You also get unlimited domestic trademark applications. And we haven't really touched on that during the seminar, but protecting your IP, especially if you want to sell your business down the track, is really important. You have a guaranteed quick turnaround time. We don't sit on things for weeks. We usually turn things around within 3 to 5 days. You are also able to plan and pay a monthly fee for cost certainty. So instead of having to have your documents changed every time something changes with the NDIA, which we know happens a lot, you don't have to go back and pay to have your agreements reviewed yet again. Everything is covered under your membership. You can claim your complimentary legal health check with us, and we will send you the details via email. You please complete the survey at the end to claim your health check. So let's go down now to our Q&A. Let's have a look at some questions that have come in. This one might be a good one for you, Matthew and Nicole. We have a SIL house where the client doesn't have any kilometers in the plan, so the provider is bearing the cost, but the client likes to drive. They have reduced the driving and said he had to catch the bus more or walk. How would you handle this situation?
Sorry, I missed the first part of the question, Astrid.
One of the SIL participants loves to drive around, I'm assuming in the support worker cars or the cars of the provider. And the provider is wondering how they can manage this situation from a cash flow perspective, because the participant does not have any transport funded in their plan.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would think of is this transport, or is it community and social participation? So I know, like at MyCareSpace, we work, a lot with the autistic community, and a lot of them love trains, and they love cars, and so the important thing is to understand, well, is this kilometers to take the person to say medical appointments or other appointments, or is this a form of community participation that the participant is choosing, and can that be covered by another part of the person's plan? So that's what I'd be suggesting. The other thing I would urge the SIL provider to think about is, do you have the right motor vehicle insurance So if you're using your motor vehicle or your fleet for transporting participants, make sure that you have the right commercial insurance in place and you're not covered by your standard CTP policy. So I think those are the two things I'd be thinking about and checking.
Thanks, Nicole. It's really useful. Matthew, we have quite a few questions about 1-to-3 ratios, because that seems to be the most common funding type for home and living. And some providers want to know, how do they manage this if the clients have different schedules, for example, with day programs, and they're coming in and out of the house at different times to maintain the 1-to-3 ratio?
Yeah, ideally, you just need a scheduling software that helps auto-calculate that for you. And obviously, if your client needs that 1-to-3 ratio, that's what you need to deliver, and that's what you've contractually essentially committed to. So you need to cover that. But if you're managing that throughout the day and they change and they fluctuate, you could try and compute that in your own head or Excel, etc., or just use a software like ShiftCare that will help you calculate that automatically and sort of highlight where you're under-resourced.
Thanks, Matthew. And someone else asked about, as a business that's yet to get its first client, how can we best prepare? So basically, just make sure you understand SIL. You are aware of the policies and procedures. We have seen some providers fail audit because they did not understand the policies that they had. You have to answer the questions to become registered. So you need a really good understanding of your obligations. Nicole, you may have some suggestions about how a provider may be able to network to find participants or clients.
Yeah. Well, just going back to the question, which is how can I prepare? Well, I think the most important thing is don't do it alone. Make sure that you have you have a network of people that you can rely on for whether it's compliance questions, whether it's medical related questions, whether it's support related. Network with other providers, learn from your peers, make sure that you have the right staff. So, don't assume anything. Don't assume, that because you've got your policies and procedures that you use to pass the audit, that you're ready to deliver SIL. So this is the biggest issue that we face at MyCareSpace. Is a lot of providers call us up and they say, okay, I passed my audit, I'm ready to deliver SIL. And we're saying, well, do you have any properties? Do you have any experience? And they say no. And we cannot work with these providers. We only work with really experienced providers who understand what they're doing. So my suggestion to new SIL providers is network as much as possible. Work with other SIL providers who have been in the market for a long time, understand, what it is that it means to deliver a great SIL service, and, come to MyCareSpace for information. So those are the tips that I'd give a new SIL provider.
Thanks, Nicole. And maybe you and Matthew, because you both touched upon the matching participants in SIL houses. We have a couple of questions about how do you ensure it's a right match? What process do you need to do to make sure the participants actually match? Are there any helpful tools or information that you're aware of that may help a provider?
Well, I'll say I don't think this is one for software, Matthew. I mean, in terms of funding ratios and rostering, sure. But I mean, I think there's no software, and hopefully AI will never replace this. We're delivering a human service, and it's so important that we don't forget this. We're delivering a human service. Our clients are people with needs and goals and dreams and wants, and this is their home. This is the home that we're providing. So you need to understand, what is it? What are their preferences? What are their choices? What is going to make them happy and comfortable? And so that matching process is probably one of the most underestimated parts of running a SIL home. And it's one that we know SIL providers struggle with a lot, and we get calls every day. I've got a vacancy, I have to fill it. Well, you can't always fill it quickly because you're matching human preferences. So that's what I'd say. I don't know, Matthew, maybe you've got a different perspective.
No, look, I don't, and I'll just add an anecdote, because it's participant matching is hard, right? Because when you get it wrong, the participant is the one that, does not benefit, in any way, shape or form. And a lot of the time that may manifest as bad behavior, may manifest as the participant running away, damaging, breaking things. Now, how does that affect you as a SIL house? One of them is you may have damage to your particular SIL house. Two is you might have to track the person when they've run away, and then you've got a potential risk issue to identify. But then the third one relates to human capital, which you might not have staff that want to go to that environment to fill that particular shift, because staff talk to each other. They say, Matt at this particular SIL house in, Geelong, for example, is disruptive, he's violent, etc., etc. But that could be because you've put me into the wrong environment. I've become a circumstance of my environment. I'm with the wrong peers. I don't have the right space to do what I need to do. And so that's where you get it wrong. So as Nicole mentioned, you've really got to meet the participant, meet their family, and maybe meet the other people that influence care in their life to understand, where are they on their particular journey, where to next, and what are the things we need to look out for when we're providing great care for this person.
Very good points. And I would say start at the beginning and have a really good client intake form. Make sure you're checking things like sensory issues, whether there's past trauma, every specific trigger. When you have the right information, then you can match the participants. You also should, and Matthew just touched on that, you should match the participant to the type of house as well. If you have someone with behaviors of concern or restrictive practices, it is also your responsibility to make sure you're not putting them in a house with, floor to ceiling windows that are easily breakable. So matching the house to the participants should also be done. We have another questions about legal protections for SIL providers. As Nicole has said many times today, insurance is key. And it's not just a protection for your company, but also protection for the directors. We are seeing more and more that directors are being held personally liable and can be statutorily liable for breaches of the consumer law, breaches of privacy, and if you are actually delivering some allied health services as well, under the breach of APRA. So trying to make sure that you have you do all the right things, you document everything, you get insurance is basically the most you can do for legal protections. There's no additional step to be taken. How do you calculate rent and other fees for the client? At the moment, SIL is not regulated at that level because it is not, the accommodation aspect is not covered by the NDIA. So it's a state by state. Some states regulate, some states do not. Most SIL providers will follow the SDA price guide, which is 25% of the DSP for rent plus 50% maximum for board. But most states do not have regulations for that.
Astrid, there's one there that says, from Reju, do you have an app which could be used to flag to ensure I'm paying staff within my SIL correctly within legal compliance? Now, that's a complicated question because it depends on where is all that information stored, and it's really, you'd probably want to go back and look at it. If you're concerned about that, you might actually want to go back and do an audit, and you might want to, find the appropriate partner to help you with that audit. And then you might want to make sure that you've got the right software and partner in there, but both from a rostering and a payroll perspective, to make sure they're joined at the hip, to make sure you're paying those staff correctly.
And we also have a question about whether ShiftCare can be used by plan
manager. Not at the moment. It's really designed for care providers and their teams at the moment.
Someone is asking what happens upon the regrettable passing of a participant. Assuming that you have a service agreement that's compliant, the price guide does allow you to charge up to 4 weeks under either irretrievable breakdown of supports or the passing of a participant. I'm not sure if Nicole or Matthew have anything to add to that.
Well, I mean, I know I keep banging on about this. Have a contingency for these types of situations where, yes, sadly, people do pass on, or people do end up in hospital for extended periods of time, and that sort of ties in with one of the questions that someone said. Well, their funding ratios is 1 to 3, and what happens if someone passes away and they still have a 1 to 3 funding? Well, that is on the provider to manage that. You can't suddenly start charging a different funding ratio to the other participants. So that is a contingency that you need to budget for, and you need to manage, and you need to expect So, when we talk about cash flow buffers, 2 months, you're flying close to the wind. That's what the average SIL providers have, is a 2-month sort of operating profit buffer. Certainly, I would encourage you to build up a bigger buffer, and that is on the provider to manage that.
Thanks, Nicole. Matthew, do you have anything to add? Otherwise, we nearly run out of time.
Yeah, look, it comes down to the same, the thing I mentioned, human capital, 70 to 80% of your outgoings. So if you lose your funding, you need to be able to make sure I can reduce my workforce and I'm not continually burning that money. So you've got to make sure you've got the right workforce and they're structured rightly from a full-time, part-time and a casual perspective to make sure you can ramp up and ramp down, as Nicole mentioned, so you're prepared for that really rainy day where it's going to suck and you just got to suck it up and do it. And you've got to get your business through. So just make sure you've considered that from your staffing perspective.
Great. Thank you, Matthew and Nicole. It was great having you with us today. That's all we have time for. We apologize if we haven't answered your question, but you can submit your details in the survey at the end and we can provide you with assistance for the questions that we didn't answer. You have my contact details, Matthew and Nicole's, and feel free to reach out to any of us. We do value your feedback, so if you could complete the survey, that would be appreciated. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Astrid. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everyone.